So in categories of expenses, let's take a look. Whoops. Let's take a look here. Cracker flash flow. Replace. Okay. So let me just make sure. Okay. Nope. We're not quite there yet. So, like I said, you're going to use your teacher guide here, going through the procedure. We're going to get into that spending plan here in a second, but you can think of categories of expenses. So fixed expenses we already talked about, and I do break this up when we're getting ready to work on our spending spreadsheet. So we already talked about fixed expenses, variable expenses, those periodic expenses, and here's some examples from real life: planned expenses and unplanned expenses. I might share that in the vocabulary, but I also want to break this out when I'm doing that with the students. And this prepares us for tracking expenses. Now, you're going to find in the lesson different expenses. Whoops. And we talk in here about keeping track of cash flow and having kids break it up. Now, in the lesson here, it says you start the day with $50 and what happens with the money that you're spending. So the problem that I have with this particular one is I don't like to use real world expenses. In my school, I do have a high poverty school, but my district's one of those what you call barbell districts. So there are some kids with quite a bit of income that their parents are doing really well financially, and I have kids who are not doing as well financially. So in our case, I come up with examples that my students can use in class. I say, especially after, so we do career exploration first, and we can do some things based on what their weekly income would be. And because in my classes, a lot of times, because this is a unit in my class, my students are doing different projects where they might make something in 3D in CAD. They might make a house and know what their expenses for that particular house is. They can start to understand what their expenses are based on certain things and how much money they want to put into other places. So like I say, you need to make this work for your curriculum. I don't teach a class that's just financial literacy, especially not at the middle school level. So again, you want to make this work for you, but you can give them examples and then they can track this during the day, especially when we're teaching online. So I only see my kids 2 times a week. I might say, your budget is $100. What are the things that you want to spend your money on? And, they might not know in advance where to classify things, but that's part of the discussion that you should have. Okay, so as they're planning, as they're doing different things here, you can look at the work that they're doing and you can say, where do you think you classify that as? What is it a planned expense? Is it an unplanned expense? Is it something that can change over time? And you might throw different things in there when they're doing the class. So you might say, okay, so we're sitting in class right now, you're going out to eat, how much are you going to spend? Take a look at that, and they can find that information, especially in today's world. You can get what the cost is of food. You can look at how much it costs to eat out, so they can make some choices based on that. My kids always use different websites to look at things, so they can go to Best Buy, they can go to Walmart, they can go to Fred Meyer, and they can find out how much does a video game cost or something along those lines. And they get really interesting with it, and when they're dealing with real numbers, it's something that really helps to learn those concepts that we're trying to teach the kids with financial management. So, here, same thing that I said. So I give them time to shop, okay? That's one of the big things that I do. They use their computers, and I can also give them sample prices, too. It's something that I've done previously, especially for my kids that need a little bit more help. My classes, like I said, the kids are all different levels. Some are gifted. Some need supports. They might have a 504, an IEP. So, scaffolding is really important in this, and think about who your kids are and what kind of supports they need to be able to do this. But I believe that you can do this. I've done this with classes at all different levels. I think being able to learn how to put something into a budget and make those decisions, even if we're just doing a little bit, we're advancing the idea of teaching our kids those core concepts in financial literacy. Exercise 7.2, living within their means. There's a variety of different case studies here that you can distribute out to your students. Now, if you want to do it in groups, you can. If you have the capability to do that, depending on your platform, go ahead and do that. Right now, it's very difficult for me to do that, teaching online. I use Microsoft Teams, and kind of splitting it up might be a little hard. So you can go ahead and just use one set of case studies for your students. But this whole section, living within their means, is knowing how to calculate salary. One question you might ask is, especially if you're talking about financial literacy, is kind of an extension. Do we subtract a percentage for the student's taxes? Build on prior learning. Use a spreadsheet. If you're using spreadsheets with your kids, go ahead and do that. And you can also categorize those expenses as well. If you're using Excel or Google Sheets, use those. You can have the kids find percentages by categories. You can even have the kids make charts if that's part of what you're doing, if you're teaching digitals, for example. If you're not teaching digitals, don't worry about that. It's a CTE course. But there's some other ways that you can build upon these things. There's some where you can build upon these things as you're working with your kids. So in this particular case here, you might pick the case study, and then there's a worksheet that you can have kids finish and answer some of these questions. And if I were doing this in large groups, so I haven't done this lesson yet this year, obviously we're doing remote learning, but I would do this with the entire class, and I might I'll probably turn this into a form where students can answer those questions. Now, some of these are going to be super hard, okay? Super hard. And you can pull out what you might use or not use. In a regular environment, I would give these to different groups of kids and then have them discuss these with each other, because they really like doing that. And that's one of the hard things. There's a lot of hard things about teaching online, right? But when you're teaching in the classroom, kids really like to debate and talk about these other things. And really think about your placement of students who's working with each other, and modify these if you need to. This is a baseline for it, but you can always change this and how it works for you. You can use it straight out of the book, but I always modify the stuff that I do to make it work for my kids. So like I said, I would modify this particular part of the worksheet and change that up a little bit for my students. One thing that I absolutely will do, regardless of how I modify the other one, is this last one on building a budget for a secret agent. Now, your kids might not even know who James Bond is, and that's fine. But there's some information here where the kids can calculate total income and then look at expenses. And you're going to have to explain what some of this stuff is: less than, equal to, more than the income, and then. Here it's having a question about opportunity cost. Now, again, this is a really difficult topic for a middle school student. So I wouldn't make this, like a summative assessment for my kids. I would have that discussion with them and see how they think about that. But if they have the idea of opportunity cost down, you can start to say, well, instead of buying that plane, what's something else I could have done with that money? Okay. So, and also too, calculating what 15% of the income is. If I'm teaching this with my kids and I'm teaching them basic formulas, they might be able to calculate that. And I think that's a fair question. Multiply it by 0.15 to know how much money they should save. And what are some things, following that the advice of the financial advisor, if you do the math here, you're going to see there's some things that James Bond has to cut back on. So I think this is really neat, and the kids like dealing with the large numbers, so they can think about those different things. But this is something that you could wrap up with the students. For me, in my summative assessment, I might say, well, let me show you actually. So for me, this lesson, again, I said this previously, it comes after career exploration. I would have them make a budget based on what their annual salary is and what their local housing cost is. So in my classes that I teach, I can tell you for sure this year, my kids are going to be making homes in 3D, right? And we talk about cost per square foot. And they would make some budget choices based on that. And in my classroom, I teach some things that, and I know this would change over time, but I teach them some things like, so for example, if they're making that $28,800, which is minimum wage at the working 40 hours a week, and we divided that by 12, this is your monthly salary, right? And for my class, I teach the kids to think of a safe number for housing. Same thing when you go to apply for a mortgage or for rent, about a third of that. So they need about $800 a month for housing. So if we plus 2,400. So this is what they would have left over for their expenses, right? And then they can make some choices for that month that they need to spend. In my case, they would be using Excel to do it. But if they have these numbers here, they can create a budget based on those numbers. And I got to tell you, after I've done the prior knowledge, using Excel, working on careers, understanding how the formulas work, I get a really good return for my students. They usually do pretty darn well, regardless of some of the struggles they might have with related to learning disabilities or different, where they might struggle in math. I find that they actually do pretty successful at Excel. Now, again, that's part of my classroom, so you need to figure out what works best for you. But those are some different tools that you can use, especially working on them online. So that was Financial Fitness for Life, Lesson 7, Managing Cash. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at this email address, and I will see you soon.